Hello, football family. Welcome into Huddle It Up Films. Here with Ken McKusick doing the second installment of the Sweet 16, a hard order at the top of the draft, not counting the quarterback. So if you missed the first one, here's the philosophy on this. We're doing a Sweet 16. Number one, Ken, because it sounds pretty cool. Sweet 16, it's got a little theme in there. But also, the Ravens pick at 22 currently. We're not looking at quarterbacks. It doesn't look like in the first round. So a few quarterbacks will go, at least four, probably, maybe even five. There's going to be a surprise pick. So if you've been doing the draft long enough, you'll know that if you pick a 22, one of your top 16 guys will be available. And we're going to put a hard order on them because, Ken, a lot of times people will ask you a question like, well, if Joey Porter Jr. is there, would you take him? And the answer is always, well, like,
Who else is
yeah.
available?
Who else is available? Yes, so that's what we're getting to. Nobody else better to join me than my friend, my colleague. We've worked together so much, Ken, the Ken McKusick from Film Study. How are you doing, Ken? And can you give us the website? Everything will be linked below, but can you give us the opening for us?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jason. Thanks always for having me on. I'm at Film Study Ravens on Twitter. FilmStudyBaltimore.com is the website. And as I'm sure people have heard, but we want to make sure they hear again, we'll be simulcasting for 3 consecutive days of the draft, at least through the Ravens' last pick. You never know when the last pick is coming, but at least through the Ravens' last pick. And that'll be simulcast with Huddle It Up Films and on the Film Study YouTube channel as well. Join us. This is not a big money-making opportunity for us. This is just an opportunity to watch with, as Jason calls it, our football family. One of the most fun 3-day periods the entire year. It's always, the draft content is always some of the most listens when we do the podcast afterwards. It won't be the total number of people on the live stream is usually less than 200, but it's definitely a party with an intimate group of folks who care about one thing: how does a draft affect the Baltimore Ravens? And that's all we care about. We do not want to hear what whoever gets picked as the first quarterback in this draft had for breakfast. It does not interest us. That player's off the board. How did that affect the Baltimore Ravens is going to be our attitude about pretty much everything.
Well said, Ken. Nothing to add. You covered it all. It's just a great time. And I can't wait for this. It's happening soon. We're recording this late on a Tuesday evening. So maybe by the time you watch this, the draft will be 1 day away. And here we are, and it's Raven-centric. And that's the point of our list. There's a lot of good players. There's a lot of different flavor of players. But which ones fit the Ravens the most? So let's go ahead. Let's start making our list, Ken. Everybody's available. No quarterbacks here. Everybody on the board's available. And for some reason, the Ravens are on the clock. Who is the number one guy in this draft for you?
Sure. Let me explain a little bit about my list first, because I think everybody creates it the same way, but I'm not 100% sure. So my guys, and I came up with a list of 20 here just because I wanted to have a few extra spots that I want to make sure are known. Includes guys that I think the Ravens would have in order on their board. So it's for them. It does not include any quarterbacks. There are certain positions where I don't expect the Ravens to make a draft pick, and I would leave those off entirely. But there's other positions where the player is too good to not be selected. And I think that's what a lot of this 1 through 16 you had in mind is, right?
That's exactly it, Ken. That's exactly it. We had a lot of fun with Vaz and Yuri on the philosophical aspects of what each player, how they fit. Not only did they have a different receiver say, but they had them in a different order over the corners, for example, or the top tackles in this draft. Where did they fit in? So that's the fun part about this exercise. So, yeah, number one player whenever you're ready, and just talk about him a little bit and maybe why he's your number one player.
Sure. And there's not too much to be said about this guy. He got mentioned specifically by DaCosta at the press conference, which I don't think is an indication at all, but Will Anderson of Alabama, by far the best edge in this draft. Of the non-quarterbacks, he's typically mocked the highest. He did have 34 or 34 and a half, I always forget which, career sacks, but only 1 forced fumble. That's the only thing I can really find negative about the guy. Extremely good pass rusher, can do it in either way, does work through a lot of contact, but can also bend a little bit and get home. And he is one hell of a football player. And if he's on the board, I can't imagine the Ravens passing on him regardless of who else is on the board.
Love it. Now, see, Will Anderson, Ken, for me, not someone I watched a lot of. Like, I just expect him to be gone. So, you only have so much time. Saw enough of Will Anderson over the last 2 years, really scouting that Alabama team, where I'm like, this guy's he's a top of the draft type guy. And in a draft like this, where there are not too many obvious superstars, you're talking about a good player, good ceiling, good floor, just solid all around. I only watched 2 games, and of course, I've seen more of them, but I know that this guy can play ball. And of course, he's pretty high on my list, but Ken has him at number 1. So, Ken, we're not going to spend too much time on Mr. Anderson. Let's get to number 2. My number 1 guy, by the way, was Jalen Carter.
Jalen Carter's my number 2 guy, but you called him out at number 1. Why don't you go first on him?
Sure. The reason I have Carter ahead of Anderson is pretty simple, philosophically, and I want to get your response to this, please. Is that to me, it is harder to find what's 2 parts harder to find a Jalen Carter than it is a Will Anderson. Jalen Carter to me, Ken, stacks up with your Jonathan Allen type prospects, your Quinnen Williams, your top of the line, those top 10 type defensive tackles, which are so rare to find. Guys who can provide pressure, can 2-gap, can shoot a gap, can shed, can be a monster in the run game and the pass game. Those guys to me are harder to find than a dominant edge rusher. It seems like every year you get either like a Myles Garrett or a Bosa brother or a Chase Young or something like that. So if I have the chance to draft a defensive tackle, my personal preference would be to take them. If I see a dominant, other than just a run stuffer, dominant 3-down player, I'm taking them. And then the second part of this, Ken, is that I don't quite see Will Anderson on the level of, like, say, Chase Young was a great prospect or a Bosa brother. I think he's like more on the Aiden Hutchinson level. So not only is it a defensive tackle versus an edge rusher, but from a talent standpoint, I prefer Carter better.
Understood completely. I don't really disagree with it in any significant way. I have Carter at number 2. The black dot situation is the one we can't completely wave our hand over. Involved in an incident involving racing, a car that he's racing with had a drunken recruiter, young lady, in the other car that apparently was driving with a higher than normal blood alcohol content. But all the details aren't important, other than she died, another teammate died, and he left the scene. The thing has been resolved in the courts in world record time. He actually was pulled out of the combine for this to be arraigned, I believe. Might not have been the exact thing, arrested or arraigned, whichever it was. And he has already had the thing resolved down to a 1-year probation, 80 hours of community service, no contest on the plea, some other things. If you're the Baltimore Ravens, I think you have to look at that, at least have a markdown for judgment. But I think the Ravens have made their decision on whether or not Carter is a guy they can even tolerate having, given that background. I will say this. The Ravens, I believe, were aware of the Jamal Lewis cell phone situation when he was drafted. I might not be 100% about that, but I think they were aware. He was aware. It happened while he was, playing at Tennessee, and he was drafted number 5 overall. Would not be too dissimilar. And frankly, if Jalen Carter drops all the way to 22 when the Ravens do have a draft, they're going to have to think very carefully about the possibility of pulling the trigger or not. As I understand the black dot system, and as there's some empirical evidence to this effect, it doesn't mean you never draft the guy. It effectively means a black mark on the guy's record. That particularly with injury concerns, Arthur Jones had one. They drafted him anyway in the 5th round. I don't know what others they've had other than perhaps Jamal, who would fit into this category of they had some criminal issue that was, well, Jamal's was actually unresolved at the time. With Carter's resolved, I think the chances are better that he falls into a normal position in the draft order. The Ravens don't even catch a whiff of him. But I agree with you. Great player and can defend the run and pass, controls his opponent very well. He's not the biggest guy in terms of having prototypical 3-tech size. He'd be an undersized 3. He can play nose. He certainly could at the college level if he needed to, but it wouldn't be where you'd put him on anything but a passing down where you had 4 outside linebackers in the game otherwise, or 3. He's a guy you would want at 5 or 3. to get him the best chance for a man-on-man matchup where he's going to be very effective. Bubble players, get players to the outside, make your run defense more effective that way, or he can make plays himself. But he's very good at taking away space as well as getting right in there with a free arm.
He
So I
is.
loved him. Number two.
Yeah, a lot of good, great things to say there, Ken. And of course, I would imagine the Ravens have made up their decision on when Carter would be draftable if he is on their board. I imagine he's off some teams' boards. It wasn't just the incident to me, Ken. It was the pro day of all the reports. And I don't put a ton of stock in the pro days, Ken, because they're just tailor made for that player to shine. So to have a player come to the pro day and have the reports be unanimously poor, like he didn't finish this drill with his teammate,
Yeah.
he didn't finish this drills with his teammate. When you had all that adversity, all those question marks, that big spotlight on you in the first place, to me that was almost like it took the one incident and made me think as a person, just naturally, is there a bigger problem here? Like, I remember saying to you on your podcast, what were you doing the night before your pro day or that morning? Like, how couldn't you be ready to really, really show out after everything that happened to you and having to be pulled from the combine, like you said? But off the field, he might be the story of the draft, Ken, if he slips and keeps slipping and keeps slipping. And as Ravens fans, of course, that's out of our hands whether he's on the Ravens board or not. You're just going to have to trust the team on that to see, because Ken, speak on this for a second. A lot of things happen in college that we don't know about. Like, we know about that tragic incident, but this is what makes the draft so hard for us. The practice habits, were there other stuff happening on campus that got covered up, just the player's personality, his work ethic, all that we don't know. And that plays a big part in the draft.
Yeah, I agree. And the tackle Wilson, I'm trying to remember who it was, who was drafted a couple of years ago by Tennessee, and he flamed out very quickly. But all of these weird things that happened in college where he wasn't supposed to be out at a party, but he was, and then he got caught, and so he went out on the balcony. And I mean, there's all these weird things going on that are have a skullduggery component to them too. My guess is the Ravens probably heard some of those stories before the draft. He was a great tackle prospect. The Ravens did not take a swing on him, and they didn't take a swing on him afterwards either when he got released. So it was an interesting kind of a walk down that road. He's not the only player who's in that category. The Ravens have a lot of people looking out for them in terms of what's happening in college. I don't believe they'll catch everything, but I believe they're going to catch a lot of things with regard to questionable behavior, questionable judgment in college.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead and reveal on my list here my number 2 guy, if you haven't seen my big board, and that's a cornerback. This is when I get to the cornerback need of the Ravens.
Mm-hmm.
I'm putting a heavy emphasis on cornerback because I look at Brandon Stevens, Ken. I look at Jalen Armour-Davis. I look at Pepe. And there's a bunch of mid-round picks trying to sort out their time, find their way into the NFL. How I would like the Ravens to address cornerback if they aren't bringing back Marcus Peters or some other veteran that we don't know about is to put a stud next to Marlon and just let him play and figure out the pieces around Marlon and then this draft pick or whoever it is from there. So cornerback on my board, Ken, I kind of pushed them up a few slots higher than maybe I normally would if we had 2 corners in place.
Yeah, and honestly, in this draft, so much of the talent is at cornerback, period. That you almost don't have to. There's abundance of talent at edge and corner in this draft. And a lot of the cornerback draft is very gradually graduated as you move through this in terms of each step down is pretty small, or at least you're getting different characteristics which do give you different reasons to believe the guy could succeed. And yes, I put a high value on corners, and a bunch of my top 20 are corners, might be as many as 7.
So my number 2 guy is Christian Gonzalez out of Oregon. I love a lot about him. I had a hard time with my ordering the first 2 corners. Next guy I love just as much, but Christian Gonzalez, talking about 6'1", so he's got the height, 4.38, so he has the speed, and that both shows on tape. And Ken, I loved his combine with his just fluid hip movements. You could see him stand out. When you know it, you see it. I was sitting here with Alec Polianis, friend of the show, friend of your show, and it was one of those where you look at each other and don't even say anything. Like, did you see? It was just it was he the way he moves is great. My main issue with Christian Gonzalez is the tackling, and it's not just a form issue for me, Ken. It's a want to get off of blocks. Uh, I prefer, and the Ravens prefer guys who will play the run at every position. You don't see that with Christian Gonzalez. It's hot and cold, but from a coverage standpoint, he's my number one college corner, and real good coverage, by the way. I liked his Georgia game. It was just very, very fluid. I know Georgia doesn't have studs coming out of the draft this year, but you could really see the way teams avoided him. So, what do you have on Christian Gonzalez, Ken?
So I like Gonzalez, and I think he's the second best cornerback in this draft. And the difference between him and Witherspoon, who's my top corner and my number 4 guy overall, I'll just kind of paint right now because I think that's the big question between these two. There's no doubt about it. If you looked at the two, if you put them in a lineup, you'd say Gonzalez is my guy because he's got the measurables. Great jumper, looks like he can cover, has all the aspects of a boundary corner you expect in terms of size and the ability to push a guy around out of bounds and whatnot, and be Ike Taylor or Jimmy Smith in that regard. And I think Ike Taylor and Jimmy Smith, frankly, brought a lot of that to the NFL as one of their principal characteristics. He's fast, so he's got that going as well. Now here's the problem: we can take a lot of things about the measurables and project that into our feelings about the players. But when I look at the difference of these two on tape, first of all, Witherspoon gives every indication of being outstanding instincts, but it's very hard, even watching good tape, to figure out who's got really the better instincts there. And I think that the actual results paint an even more clear picture. And after a year, and I know you were high on Trent McDuffie last year, he was the guy, the cornerback, who had outstanding results. Okay. He went to the NFL, great rookie year. He's got a Super Bowl ring already with the Chiefs. So he's got that going for him. Devin Witherspoon, here's the difference between him and Gonzalez in 2022. The opposing passer rating throwing against Christian Gonzalez, 74.7. That's good. That could get you in among the top cornerbacks. You certainly would love to have that in the NFL. I mean, that's probably about where Marlon was last year. And Devin Witherspoon, 25.3. Now, every ball grounded, 39.6. Throw to Devin Witherspoon, 25.3. That means he's tossing in some interceptions, not giving you many yards at all. When you look at yards per target, critical thing. I've gotten this incorrect, by the way, on other shows where I've quoted this. I looked at it again today to make sure I was right, and I wasn't. Christian Gonzalez, 7.7 yards per target, so almost 8 yards per target. That's not utterly terrible, but it's also inconsistent with a top cornerback on a college draft. So it's the one figure that I kind of forgive in his thing, but definitely don't have a uniformly positive report on Christian Gonzalez for you. Devin Witherspoon, on the other hand, 3.3 yards per target. He is one of 2 corners at the very top of the draft in that particular statistic, along with the guy I really love at 22, who other people may know about. But Devin Witherspoon has all the characteristics I want in a corner, and the instincts that many people attribute to him, but don't really credit him with as much because his measurables aren't quite as good as Gonzalez, are what the reason why I would put him over the top. And so between the two, I have Witherspoon at number 4. I have Gonzalez at number 6.
Very fair. It's dealer's choice. Like I think that these prospects are razor thin, as I said before. And I'm wondering if the yards per target difference is a function over all the games we don't get to see and that kind of thing, Ken. Over the tackling. I mean, Devin Witherspoon is an extremely physical player. Downhill, highlight hits on his tape. Just extremely physical. Whereas mentioned before, Gonzalez getting off of blocks doesn't look like the 1-2 is as great as Witherspoon. Just a really solid physical player in the run game and screen passes, Ken.
So Witherspoon, do I have his tackle numbers here? Oh, I had this for almost everybody here. I think he had over a 10. It's about his only bad thing, and he had over a 10% missed tackle rate, but Gonzalez was around the same. And when they look at their career, there's almost no difference between the two. So if you, I'm trying to bring this up. I'm sorry, I'm taking a little bit extra time here.
Take your time. I'll edit it in, Ken.
Yeah, no problem. 11.4% missed tackle rate for Witherspoon in 2022 and 13.5 for his career. So you improved a little bit over some of the past years, but basically the last 3 years, he's been right around 11%. 13.5, when I looked at the safeties, was a very median missed tackle rate. It's probably similar at cornerback. You're tackling slightly lighter players, but you're also having to do so sometimes in a more challenging environment. But anyway, I think that rate is not terrible in that particular case. And I think Gonzalez was a similar level and similar for his career anyway. I tell you what, I put this in there for every corner, and because it was one of the things, for every safety, because it was one of the things I was really looking at. And I did not do it for either of these guys. I can look it up, but I don't have it right now.
That's okay. Who is your number 3 guy, Ken?
My number 3 guy, it would maybe surprise some people, but if he's available, it would surprise me. Paris Johnson, offensive tackle, OSU, got an absolutely perfect left tackle frame, outstanding 2022 results. Everybody knows I'm a arm length aficionado. He's 36 and a quarter arms. He does have a problem that he uses both flippers at the same time, as I say, with regard to pinball. If you ever want to tell a bad pinball player, watch them use both flippers at the same time. That tells me the person's almost never played pinball before, but it's a game of having to use them one at a time and make saves that way. Well, offensive line play is not dissimilar. If you're in interior offensive line play, just had Ben Powers on the show. He says he uses his right hand for power. He uses left hand for control, starts on the shoulder of the opponent, works down to the neck, as the V of the neck, so he can grab them tight right there. And then he has a better chance to move people around. Same thing works in terms of punching with one hand first, getting yourself in a position so that you can deal with the counter that comes after over that. Don't be completely off balance, but still make a move that's going to help you square up against that very dangerous edge rusher who's undoubtedly a better athlete than you are. So anyway, that's the one very small thing to point at, and with edge rushers in particular, but with a lot of other things. I love an edge rusher who maybe doesn't have a complete toolkit, but is still ripping it up at the college level, because you think, boy, when he gets a toolkit, he's going to be great. That's kind of the case with Paris Johnson. If he's got this big a flaw and is still able to protect this effectively at Ohio State, I think he'll be great in the NFL.
I think he will too, and he made a true first-round grade on my board. And when it comes down to it, those are very hard to earn. I was taught true first round grade, first rounder in any draft. And the best way, like something I've done, is look at the last 2 or 3 drafts, maybe put 2 of them together. Is that guy still getting into the first round if you put 2 drafts together? For me, Paris Johnson is a yes. You mentioned the excellent length. He's not using it to the best of his ability, maybe at this point, but his feet are so light. It's so easy to him. And like you said, he played really, really well at Ohio State. And, the bull rushing, I think people knock him on that. But it reminds me almost of Ronnie Stanley, Ken, where he'll give ground, but he's very trustworthy as being able to throw down that anchor when he wants to after, settling himself and settling his hands. And, will he get charged for some pressures that are technically pressures? Maybe, but is it going to affect the quarterback? No, I think that he'll have that trust from the quarterback that he knows, oh, this guy's trying to bull. I feel a little pressure. Paris Johnson Jr. has got that.
Slow death. So it's a lineman who knows how to die slowly can give his quarterback a lot of options in terms of how to move around. And Lamar's fantastic, even with blindside pressure at navigating the pocket, with Stanley giving it up.
So there you go, Ken. So Will Anderson, Jalen Carter, Paris Johnson, Devin Witherspoon is Ken's list. I have Jalen Carter, Christian Gonzalez, and Witherspoon together at number 3. So I put the cornerbacks together. And then Will Anderson. So Ken, wondering if our number 5 guys are the same. Go ahead and reveal your number 5 guy and tell me what you have on him, please.
I've got Tyree Wilson, edge, Texas Tech. And here's what I love about him. 35 and 5/8 inch arms and still bench 23 times. Now it's much harder to do the bench when you have longer arms. And they should have an adjusted bench rating, or maybe I should figure out what is a reasonable adjusted bench score after watching a lot of this kind of thing over the years. But when you talk about functional strength, there may be some people who look at 23 bench reps and say he's okay, but he's not exceptional. I think that probably does translate to being exceptional functional strength on the field, and we'll see how that works out. There's more to it, obviously, than bench reps in terms of strength. There's leverage and all the other things you can do with it. But made lots of plays as a run defender where he keeps an arm free, bubbles a runner. I loved seeing that. A lot of complementary plays. It wasn't all him making the tackle, but he can keep an arm free. He plays through double teams well. Honestly, there were times when he looked like Myles Garrett, moving between two guys who are trying to block him at a 45-degree angle. With the way the Ravens love to run stunts, have a lineman cross a face of a player, there'd be a lot of opportunity to make use of that, whether he's the looper and somebody's peeling off an underneath player to try and block him with a big disadvantage, then reaching for that usually. There'd be lots of good opportunities for Tyree to be able to show that. Is he a guy who can move to the Sam side? That I don't know. And it would be kind of cool for the Ravens to get a Sam, but then on the other hand, I want a great rusher of any type. I guess at this point, if Oweh had to move in year 3, I really am not in favor of it, because I think Oweh is one of the potential big strengths of this team from the rush side, along with Ajabo. But if it had to happen because you got the next great pass rusher, then I think you do it.
There you go. So I love your order so far, Ken, because there's no buddy system at the top like mine is. So mine, for example, I have Gonzalez and Witherspoon at 2 and 3, and Anderson and Wilson at 4 and 5. And to me, that's need-based. Like, I see all those prospects as a similar grade, if you're just going to give them an overall grade. And I prioritize the corners slightly over the edges because I stated my preference earlier. I want a stud corner to go next to Marlon. Both classes, as you mentioned earlier, deep. So if you say, all right, well, you can get one first-round corner and a third or fourth-round edge, or you can get a first-round edge and the third or fourth-round corner. My personal preference is to take the corner early, get yourself a nice edge later in the draft. So I wanted to ask you about that, though. Will Anderson, your number 1 player, Tyree Wilson, your number 5 player. What is the difference? I have them pretty close. I think Wilson has a higher upside maybe than Will Anderson does. Will Anderson a higher floor. But I guess you're seeing Will Anderson is clearly like a higher graded player than Tyree Wilson then.
Yeah, a little. He's a little more versatile in having the obvious power to work through contact as well. And there are other guys by this way in this draft, a whole bunch of guys who all they do is work through with power. They're bull rush. They work through contact. They're really not trying to bend. Will Anderson is the guy who really stands out above them all as a guy who could do both. I think that Tyree Wilson is going to really benefit anytime that one of two things happens. There's any sort of disadvantage created for somebody who's trying to block him, and that we talked about stunts being a possibility, but there's lots of other games you can play to get that. We've seen Oweh kind of feign a drop from the line of scrimmage and then go, and that can create a lot of problems in terms of timing for an offensive lineman. But also, just having a pass rush plan is going to be something where it's possible Tyree Wilson will be a better long-term prospect of that, because I think he might be a slightly better athlete overall. So I can see either. I just think Will Anderson right now is the more versatile player. And I think I agree with your comment that Wilson might have the higher upside.
Kind of reminds me almost of like last year with Aiden Hutchinson and Trayvon Walker.
Yep.
Aiden Hutchinson was a polished player. Like, coaches would love him. But Trayvon Walker had some physical skills that Hutchinson didn't have. You're weighing like the upside against the sure thing. Both high prospects. And let's be honest, Ken, if we're choosing between the two or any of those guys we've mentioned so far, we probably going to turn the pick in, buddy. Like, I don't know if we even trade back for any of these monsters on the board. So we both gave 5. We both have Tyree Wilson at number 5. Getting into it, Ken, who is your number 6 guy?
Well, my number 6 guy I already mentioned was Christian Gonzalez. So we got a little bit of differentiation here between Witherspoon and Gonzalez. Gonzalez just not quite the prospect Witherspoon is. So if there was a system of 8.5 kind of thing, he'd be a half tick lower on my board. And honestly, there are some things about Gonzalez that I really don't love, and I had to question with regard to some of the other guys a little bit lower down the board, does it even really make sense, that relationship? But Gonzalez at number 6, I'm comfortable with.
So, Ken, this will surprise you or surprise people out there. So we have the same top 6, just in a different orders. Just realize that and just double check that. So we're on to 7
See you had
already.
Paris Johnson at 6, or who did you have?
I have Paris Johnson actually at number 6. So I have Carter, Gonzalez, Witherspoon, as you see on the screen there, Anderson, Wilson, and Johnson. Ken has Will Anderson, Jalen Carter, Paris Johnson, Witherspoon, Wilson, and Gonzalez. So top 6, man. It's hard to get consensus on stuff like this, Ken. I'm surprised we're on the same page so far.
This happens a fair amount with me and Michael Crawford. I'm going to tell you, it seems to happen a lot. My number 7.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm on to another offensive tackle at this point, Broderick Jones of Georgia. Has what you want in terms of the size, definitely behind Johnson in terms of what I think his potential upside is. He does some things right now with hand placement that are pretty good, and he does some other things that probably could use a little work. I would say Johnson is behind him very clearly in terms of ability to use his punch at this point, which actually I think is a good thing for him. And I mentioned why. There's an opportunity for improvement there later. Broderick Jones has exactly the frame you want, 34 3/4 inch arms. That's fantastic. He actually ran the 40 in under 5 seconds. So he's a guy, if the Ravens stick with some of the run game concepts from Roman, or even if they don't, you like to have a tackle who can move like that and get downfield a little bit and make a block for you. A lot of things to love. I do think he'll be the pass blocker in the NFL, people expect. And I don't think he's limited like some of the other guys in this draft to playing right tackle only.
Me too, Ken. 100% on all of them. He is also my number 7 player. And to me, he's just a first rounder. I think that this is exactly where a lot of times I'll question my order, Ken, but number 7, Broderick Jones, is exactly where I would put him on this board. Never question about moving him ahead of the other guys. Never question about dropping him below the guys I have below him on the list. There's just a value. I almost see Paris Johnson Jr. as the Ronnie Stanley and Broderick Jones as the Laramie Tunsil. If I had to describe them stylistic wise, you mentioned the athleticism, the frame. He's a big, strong guy. The type of player that usually just translate really well to the NFL when you consider that he has good feet too. So he has everything you're looking for physically, playing at a major program. He's just kind of a really like a comfort pick. And when we're talking about some of the other players that are coming up who are more positions of need, like I understand, some Ravens fans will maybe want to put a wide receiver here, Ken, or something else. But if you can get yourself a 10 to 15-year tackle that could play either spot, you take that in the first round every time. Need comes into play, Ken, but a quality, he has a true first round grade for me. I don't pass on those guys. You can't take those positions lightly.
So number 7 is also the last point at which I think there's a player here that I don't think will be available when the Ravens draft. The rest of them down the line, some might be, some won't be, probably. Some will definitely get taken before, but there's a chance on every person the remainder of the way down that the Ravens could get them, to me. So
yeah, 100%. And as a matter of fact, I look at the magic number of maybe 12 to 14 overall in this draft, to where anything could happen. And I agree 100%. Like, I have one other player that I give a true first round grade to, but it's not consensus. I get a lot of questions on whether this next guy that I have, who is Joey Porter Jr., by the way, I'll reveal my number 8, whether he'll fall or whether he'll not. I don't think he does, because when I look at the tape, when I look at the measurables, and when I consider the bloodlines, which I put stock into, Ken, because there's something to be said about, man, his dream is to make it in the NFL, or his dream is to be better than his father in the NFL. You're talking about knowing what it takes to be a pro athlete. The bloodlines of Joey Porter comes into play. Of course, he's a long arm corner. I liked what he did against Marvin Harrison Jr. By the way, we're watching Joey Porter against Marvin Harrison in college, Ken. We're getting old. But a lot of things were made about Marvin Harrison had a good game. That did not come against Joey Porter. I saw 2 catches, one of which was a real little short pass that there's, whatever. And the other one was a nice play by Marvin Harrison, who will probably be a top 10 pick next year. So I loved that game, that performance from Joey Porter. I thought it was a positive for him. People didn't test him a lot. It didn't seem what I had to watch a lot of Joey Porter just to see him make play on the ball, because they just saw this big long corner over there and said, we're going somewhere else. So he is my number 8 guy, solidly number 8 on my board as well.
All right, fair enough. He is number 13 on my board. And I'll tell you, well, we'll go through all the players before this, but I've only got one cornerback ahead of him, and he's my number 8 guy.
Okay.
But let me tell you about Porter a little bit first, or why I thought so. Certainly has the great boundary characteristics, 34-inch arms, 446. All of that screams a guy who can push somebody around, who can play press as needed. His ball production at Penn State was really abysmal. 1 interception in 4 years, and he broke up a fair number of passes last year with 11, which is it's good, but it's just not the kind of ball production you would expect out of a top flight corner, where there's going to be a fair number of underthrows on long balls his way at the least. My number 8 guy is the exact opposite of Joey Porter, and that's Emmanuel Forbes of Mississippi State. Marcus Peters 2.0, fantastic gambling instincts, likes to play the back end of cover 3. He's not really a press guy. A lot of people are on him about his weight, which he weighed into the combine at 166. To me, that's that's not really what I'm seeing him. He doesn't look like a 166-pound player the way he hits coming downhill. He looks like a guy who really understands how to read the quarterback quickly, get to the ball carrier, and neutralize that weight disadvantage by making a quick, hard tackle before that receiver can juke out of play. Forbes has an unbelievable record of 14 college interceptions. No, at one point I thought he had 20 PDs and it was 14 interceptions. It turns out Pro Football Reference's college version separates passes defense from interceptions. He actually had 20 passes defense and 14 other interceptions.
Right.
And they do something else too. They include the sack yards with rushing yards.
Quarterback rushing.
So it's very weird. Anyway, that is the way they do it, and a difference from the college and pro statistics and the way they're kept. But Emmanuel Forbes, the greatest ball hawk, just about in NCAA history, with 6 pick sixes, which is the record, 14 total interceptions. Playing on the back end of a cover 3 zone, and the Ravens have a lot of reasons why they want to play zone defense a lot on this team, with one of them being Kyle Hamilton. One very big one being Kyle Hamilton is going to be a good zone player. Also, to the degree they would go to a dime package on 3rd down or even have linebackers, they'd probably prefer not to have that all be man alignments. But with large underneath players, favor guys on the back end in zone. Also, packages with pressure that is schemed up and can get home quickly or get the first pressure quickly favors zone defense. So I like the idea of having Emmanuel Forbes on the back end, eyes on the quarterback. I'm breaking now. Quarterback didn't realize it yet. Ball's up there, didn't even see him, and he's gone for 6 the other direction. If you look at Forbes' interception, whole bunch of different things. Outstanding tip drill player to himself. He gets cuts under a route like nobody else. He catches up on the mistakes when they're overthrows. He catches the mistakes when they're underthrows. There's a whole bunch of very different interceptions, and I really love that about him. And my number 8 guy overall, and I think, frankly, he might be the guy at number 22. I think that if you look at the other guys available, and I think, honestly, if it's Emmanuel Forbes and all the corners are available, and a few of the other guys that are still on the list are still available, I still think it could be Forbes. The Ravens may feel like they can trade down and still get him, because I think on consensus boards, he's sometimes lower. I wouldn't even screw with it. I'd take him at 22 and not look back from that decision.
Ken, thank you for everything you just said, because I've talked about Forbes a lot on my channel, off my channel, on other people's channels. And I expressed this to you when we were doing the show. I'm happy that there's somebody in this universe, not just somebody, my friend Ken, who likes Forbes, has him even higher than I do on my list. So I wanted to address the tackling, though, one more time. Not going to go on. Don't have anything else to add. I put together a little clip of about 6, 7 plays on Twitter the other day, just showing exactly how physical Forbes is in the run game, his urgency, his eyes, and even when he can't get to the guy, the way he sets the edge with his arms and forces the action back into the linebacker, taking out plays, showing urgency, shedding, pouncing on you, and talking to you after he does it, Ken. This is not a passive, scared player. He has got some attitude to him. And, the physical build, I don't think you need to be like rocked up to be a good tackler. And its legs look pretty rail thin. And I heard somebody say to me, Ken, well, once he puts on weight, because of this tackling, maybe he'll lose speed. But he's a 4.36 guy. I want to say it's 4.36.
435. Yep.
4.35 guy. So okay, he's got speed to give. If he puts on 10 pounds or whatever in the NFL weight program, he's still going to be a 4.3 guy probably if it's good weight. So I don't worry about anything. Love Emmanuel Forbes. Have him a little lower on my list. So Ken, what else would you like to say?
Just about Forbes, I want to make this point, is that yards per target is always a great measure to use for cornerbacks to look at it. And Forbes is not quite at the top of the class in terms of yards per target, although he's good. He was, I think, 4.9 yards per target. I got to look at this again, 257 and 62. I think it works out to about 4.9 yards per target, but it might have been, no, I got the wrong year. I'm sorry, 2022, 284 and 58. Okay, so it's going to be a little bit, it's going to be 4.9 yards per target. And that's fine, by the way. That certainly is significantly better than Gonzalez, but it's almost as good, not quite as good as Witherspoon. If I net out his 174 interception return yards from his yards, he's down to 110 yards allowed net, and it's under 2 yards per target. So I'm not even 100% sure. I know that the consensus pick would be to go to Gonzalez over Forbes, but honestly, if faced with those two at 22, I really, let me just say this. I really hope Gonzalez doesn't drop to 22 because I would really love to see it be Forbes.
Not your flavor of player. Great player in Gonzalez, but you like the flavor of Forbes better.
Yeah.
That's
for the Ravens defense.
That's the beautiful thing about this draft, Ken, and why our Raven-centric board is so important. I'm looking at stylistic fits. I mentioned Kalijah Cansey, who would be higher on my board if we were a pure 4-3 team. We're not. Mm-hmm. So he's small, undersized, leaves a lot of room in the running game. He's lower. Emmanuel Forbes would play perfect in that Marcus Peters role. So we have our first break here. Ken, number 9, give it to me.
Sure. Number 9, Nolan Smith of Georgia, explosive edge rusher, 439 guy. The reason I have him higher than a lot of boards, and he very well may be available 22. The Ravens will. It's a good chance they're going to get a shot at him. The reason I like him is because I think he maps out very well to a Sam role. And so you can ease through the end of the Tyus Bowser era if that's going to be here. I think after 24, I believe it ends, right?
He's cuttable next year, basically cuttable next year with a good savings, and that's his last year.
So, I mean, obviously with the money
after 2024, I mean, not this coming season. Yes.
So Tyus is here for 2 more years. But if you want to, first of all, learning the Sam position in the NFL when you haven't really played it all that much in college, you really want that 2-year landing strip anyway. And he would take some snaps this year there. He would take a lot more snaps in 24, and then hopefully you'd be at a point where you can move on if you need to. And honestly, in 24 is going to be the Ravens' really tight budgetary year, but they may do some additional things to roll forward cap as well. But they're going to be looking to save dollars and worried about how they find them. So
Nolan Smith, also a part of my Sweet 16. We'll reveal him coming up later. Love him as a player. I think that if you just watched a few games from this year, you didn't get the entire picture. Go back to 2021. I think that the pec that eventually tore for Nolan Smith was a factor before he was injured. You could just tell it was just a little bit different as far as his aggressiveness and his movements. People will worry. I'm glad that you said that he's a possibility to slip to the Ravens, because this is something I've been saying out loud now for about a week. If you're a strictly 4-3 team, you're not going to like Nolan Smith. He's going to be lower on your board because he's only 238 pounds. So 3-4 teams, that's where he's going to want to go. You play a lot of 3-4 defense to take a guy that high in the draft. Teams will worry about his 238 pounds and say maybe he's not an edge setter. Maybe he's bad against the run. We can't have a quote-unquote defensive lineman edge player be bad against the run. I think his run defense is well above average. The way he's ever able to see past his blocker, leverage that blocker, play stronger, much stronger than 238. And then, of course, he'll grow into some weight. I don't worry about that. He's high on my board as well. I think that that would be a slam dunk home run hit. And I think a lot of these mock drafts they just see this guy needs an edge. He's the next edge. Let's go ahead and give him to that team when really they're not a fit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's another guy who I think is more of a 4-3 edge than what the Ravens would really want. That's coming up on the list still to go. But yeah, I would agree. This guy is really made to play 3-4. And I think another team that doesn't have the reliance on the Sam that the Ravens have in their scheme. They like to drop players. They like to zone blitz. They really like a Sam who can drop the cover. I think other teams are not going to get the same value out of Nolan Smith. And that's why I think his combination of size and speed is not going to be as valued as it should be. And frankly, I think that's a lot of reason that Oweh dropped to the Ravens. There was a college production issue there too, but I think that's one of the reasons that dropped to him.
There you go. So I'm going to reveal my number 9 player. I'm going to shake things up, finally getting off of the positions that we've covered so far: edge, cornerback, tackle. Got the D lineman, of course, up there, Jalen Carter. But number 9 is where I start. No true first round grade. A guy I predict will go in the first round. And that's Jackson Smith-Njigba, my number 1 receiver in this class. I love him, Ken. I love the way he operates as a receiver. The only question with him, of course, is does he have elite long speed? No, he doesn't. But he does have elite ability to leverage his defenders, to read the defense, the quickness you saw in the 3.93 shuttle. I don't put a ton of emphasis on every single number, Ken, but when you run a 3.93 shuttle and your peers who are considered quick players themselves are running into 4.2s and 4.3s, that's a huge mathematical advantage, and it shows in his play. It shows in his yak. He's 6 foot tall. He's got strength to him. Just a natural wide receiver, great body control before the catch, after the catch, great IQ. And to me, that means more like a cornerback can. There are strict standards I have, especially when it comes to speed. It's kind of non-negotiable to me because the cornerback has to react, has to be in chase mode a lot, has to tackle, whereas the receiver knows where he's going to go and is going to try to set you up and manipulate you. Nobody better in this draft at doing that, at working with his mind, than Jackson Smith-Njigba. I love the combine. I would mention this to Sarah and Bobby the other day, where everybody's looking at the cone and making sure they're going around the cone and timing it real right. He's doing head fakes and shoulder shakes around the cone. Like, he looked like he had been doing this and practicing this for years. Not a nerve in his body. Just, this is what I do. Here I am, ready to go. So I actually love him more than consensus. You know, obviously on a Ravens board, wide receiver at this time is still a need. Would rather have a corner, would rather have Joey Porter, for example, or Witherspoon. But I can't fade Jackson Smith-Njigba anymore just because of my confidence level in him translating to the pro game. So Jackson Smith-Njigba, I said a lot there, Ken. What stood out to you?
So, look, I love the guy too. I have him at number 18 and my 3rd of wide receivers. And I'll go through some of my reasoning, because the first thing you come out is his measurables are outstanding, even with the 4.48-40 that I think, I'm not sure if that occurred at the combine or was reported from a pro day or whatever it might have been, but it doesn't matter. It's obviously not elite speed. 3 cone of 6.57. You mentioned the shuttle, both best in the group. The issues are more the injury recovery. Now, I'm not going to get on the guy for taking a long time to recover from a soft tissue injury last year. So he had his hamstring problem, and it took him basically all year to recover. He was only targeted 8 times all year. So there's nothing in 2022 data to go on here. In fact, he'd have been a lot better off monetarily if he could have gone pro after his sophomore season. And sophomore season is one of the greatest by a receiver in NCAA history. It's up there anyway. He had 14.2 yards per target, 141.8 passer rating on his targets. But here's the thing. He was a big slot squeezed between primarily Olave and Wilson playing on the outside. And that is such an enormous advantage, I can't even say. In fact, getting a great receiver to play X and another one to play Z is what the Ravens hope to do in terms of getting Mark Andrews or other flex tight ends a similar sort of advantage out of the slot. The Ravens' need for a big slot is less. Jackson Smith and Jigma has two kind of, I wouldn't say strikes against him, but one is a developmental point that for him to have a lot of value, he has to develop into an X or a Z at the NFL level. He has the testing that he can run every single route and could project to an X. We just haven't really seen that yet at the college level. We've seen a lot of route running, a lot of great route running, no doubt about it, and measurables that hold on to it. They're just out of the slot. And that will create, generally speaking, better matchups for him, by the way, whether he's up against a slot corner, whether he's up against a safety, or he's up against a linebacker. He's not going against his aircraft carrier corners, and he's not generally being followed all over the field by the other team's best cornerback because they had Olave and Wilson, first-round draft picks, both taken in the first 12 or so, that were there on the outside. So his season was unbelievably good, and then he missed this season where he would have still been one of several high-end targets on a team that had Harrison and the guy's name I always forget. EE. Yeah. So he would have still been a guy who got good playing time. Got kind of bashed for Todd McShay about not coming back. So either way, I've got to dock him a few points on my list for either being a guy who has a harder time recovering from injuries, whatever that may mean, or being a guy who kind of bailed on the season because he didn't want to risk his draft stock. Either one of those is not like an ideal situation. And I'm not saying you want to blame the guy too much, but the Ravens' history with injured wide receivers and guys who have not recovered is so fraught with peril in terms of the next mistake that I don't really think they want to do it. Even Marquise Brown coming here with, coming off this Frank and having a pin in his foot and whatever it was his rookie year, who was pretty damn good that rookie year, is not exactly what you want. And the other guys they've drafted, with the mistake on Perriman, with not really drafting pure X characteristics with a guy like Clayton, has just not been pretty over the years. So I think the Ravens want to get it right. I'm not 100% sure Jackson Smith and Jigba is the guy. I like two guys better at that wide receiver position.
Okay, very fair. See, in my opinion, I've seen enough, and I don't care where he was lined up. Of course, he was in a great position next to Olave and Wilson, no doubt about it. I've seen enough that I can project comfortably an extremely high floor. I feel confident in projecting him at least to play Z, if not X. Maybe he gets jammed at the line of scrimmage too much. I don't know. I haven't seen that part of it. But as far as a speed standpoint, I don't worry about it at all. I think he plays a little faster than that. He's obviously not a blazer, but he uses his body so well and all the reasons I went on. So that's why I have him that high on my list. The only part I would argue with you if we had time. We don't have time, but I don't think he would have went higher last year than I think he's going to go higher this year than he would last year. So the cost of money part, I don't really buy into that because last year's wide receiver class was so stacked and this one isn't. So that's kind of where I stand with that.
We had the run on receivers, though, that was ended at number 12 or whatever that allowed the Ravens to get Hamilton. I would have thought he'd have gone first 15 or 16 players, and maybe he still will, but it's about the range.
Yeah, see, I put him more in the Jahan Dotson range as far as a prospect, maybe a slot, maybe an outside, maybe that kind of thing. So we'll have to see on draft day for that. So Ken, who is your number? He was my number 9 guy. Who is your number 10 we're on to here?
So number 10, Luke Van Ness of Iowa. A good guy. I think he probably ends up as a 4-3 end, which limits the teams that can probably draft him. 34-inch arms, always a plus. By the way, the distinction between a guy who might seem like a good 4-3 end and, how do you use him in a 4-3? I just have to throw my arms up. It's not really that fine. If they drafted Luke Van Ness, I'd be thrilled. He'd be a good player and the Ravens would find a use for him. And maybe they put him at rush linebacker. Maybe they kick him inside on some rush downs and they use him there, but they will find a use for a player that good. But I think probably a team with a 4-3 is going to like him more, and he'll be their guy instead of what most likely would turn into a 3-4 rush linebacker for the Ravens.
There you go. And I have him as somebody that can slide inside as well on rush downs, power edge. The reason I have him, I wouldn't have him higher than say Smith and Jigba or even Porter, is because I just don't know as far as the fit. We have 2 rush ends already. You mentioned it earlier. I don't want to take Gaddafi off of rush end. Ajabo's a rush end. Uh, Van Ness, heck of a player. I think that, the way he played the run, if he puts on a little grown man weight, he could be a guy maybe you take a chance on in 2nd and 10 at 3 tech against certain teams who aren't very good run teams, where you can say, all right, well, he can hold he's not going to dominate, but he uses his length so well. He stacks up. He's gained a few pounds now. He's gotten used to the NFL strength that maybe he won't be restricted to like edge defensive end. Maybe you can sneak him in at 3 tech. So I think the upside is there for Van Ness. He is actually the next player on my list too, Ken. So number 10 for both of us. My number 11 was Nolan Smith. So I got a little bit of a buddy system there as far as Van Ness and Smith. I like Van Ness's versatility a little bit more than Nolan Smith, and I like his upsides a little bit more than Nolan Smith. That's why I have them together, but no real preference. I feel like Smith would be a better fit for right now. I feel like Van Ness would be the better fit for now, later. I just feel a little bit splitting hairs between the two. So we're on to your number 11 guy.
My number got another 11 guys, another edge. Derek Hall of Auburn. Here's a guy that I like because he did well in the SEC despite an incomplete toolkit. So playing Auburn, you're already playing in the biggest leagues. Stepping up to the NFL is going to be less of a step for him than it will be for most of the other non-SEC players in the entire draft. Despite an incomplete toolkit, he could get Chuck Smithified, take a big step up in terms of what he has there. He just turned 22 in March. A lot of the edge rushers are bigger players who are a year older, so that's young. The explosiveness was there, but the thing that I really fell in love with, and the reason that moved him up to 11 on my list, was awareness. And I look at him and I see a guy who has some of the Terrell Suggs awareness. That's too much credit to be giving this early to a player like this, but really understands when a screen is coming, understands when it's his responsibility to do things, understands backside containment, did a very good job on that in terms of run play. But there's one particular play I saw where he trailed a running back out of the backfield. And he was kind of like a tick late on it, but he just got back and made the tip and defended the pass. And I said, you know what? He kind of looks like he could play Sam to me. And that was what really made me think, yeah, he'd be a good choice for the Ravens.
Love his burst off the line of scrimmage. I would say it's the best. Love Miles Murphy's burst, by the way. He makes my list barely here, Ken, but Miles Murphy for me is actually outside of the 16.
Mm-hmm.
But with Derek Hall, here's my pushback, Ken. Here's what I want you to respond to, because obviously he's great. I worry that he's so much of a one-trick pony. It's speed to power, and that's it. And I don't see any counters. And I understand coaching comes into play when you get that pro coaching. I just don't bank on that as much as I would like to see at least some kind of effort towards doing it. And I wonder that he gets on that one-way track that he overwhelms college tackles with. And then when he gets to the pro level, they'll be ready. They'll be sitting on it. And that his pure pass rush won't translate. Ken, talk me up on that.
I'll talk you off the ledge here a little bit. Okay. So first of all, position coaches are the new golden bars of the NFL. You get great position coaches. They're your ticket to turn fifth-round offensive linemen into second-round offensive linemen. And the Ravens have certainly had good offensive line coaching. They've had lousy wide receiver coaching over the years. They've just been crap at developing wide receivers. They've taken a big swing to get Chuck Smith here in Baltimore and change how their edges develop. And I think he is one of the guys. And if you want to look for surplus value in any player, find the guy with the incomplete toolkit. You're saying all I see is speed to power. Sorry, all I see is speed to power. He's a one-trick pass rusher. I don't disagree. I think that's exactly what he is right now. And I think that's why you can love a guy like that who can still be effective rushing in the SEC, which is, major league territory, and hope that he will develop into something more. They did it with Adafioye too, by the way, clearly a guy who had not had college production, to 0 sacks in his senior year, if I recall correctly, or in his last year at Penn State. And I think Hall would be an excellent risk in that sort of player. And in a lot of ways, he's similar in terms of either one of them probably could have projected to Sam. I think Owe is better left now on the blind side, but in the case of Hall, I think I'd try and make sure he would cross train at Sam.
There you go, folks. So if you guys have watched Derek Hall, please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your opinion on this. He's, like I said, he's a guy that I see more of as just a rush end only, and I worry about his development as far as how he can help the Ravens right away. And if he ever helps the Ravens, I like him at rush, Ken. I really do. So let's go ahead and move on. Ken's number 11 was Hall. My number 11 was Nolan Smith. So we're on, man. We're getting down to it. And you said this before, Ken. But we're in the range where these guys are real
Oh, they're
possibilities
available. Yeah.
at
Yeah.
22. So really important ordering of these prospects if two or more are available. So who is your number 12 guy?
So number 12 is the first wide receiver on my list, Quentin Johnston of TCU, 6'3", 208, 449. That was a pro day measurement, so not a speed guy. Definitely another big body. He is an absurd target radius player, absurd jumps out of the building in terms of that. So that's what you want. His yards per target have been good over all of the last three seasons. When I say good, I mean great at the college level. 11.0 yards per target in 2022 and 10.8 over the last 3 seasons combined. Smith and Jigma had a fantastic year in 2021 with a fair amount of help. Now, Quentin Johnston at TCU, pluses and minuses. Well, you can see that he'd be doing that well, but also a great catch radius really helps. Good yak ability. To me, he's the most obvious X receiver in the class. Nobody else can I really put that tag on, at least not to the degree. But he's the guy who I would say put him at X, forget about him, and he'll be your vertical guy. He'll be able to run much of the route tree. There are other route runners I love better in the class, but really love his size and catch radius.
Love it, Ken. And we had Yuri and Vaz on doing the same exercise with me. They both had Quentin Johnston as their number 1 receiver as well. And I've had this discussion before. He just scares the daylights out of me. Your analysis is great on him. I see him more as a boom or bust. Sometimes he looks like the best receiver in this class. Obviously, the prototypical X receiver of this class. But that catch radius that you're talking about, Ken, I see it in the measurables. I don't see it down the field when he's getting bullied and he doesn't even extend his arms sometimes. He'll jump up to body catch it. And there's a play against Julius Brents in that TCU KSU game where, the cornerback reads it, intercepts it in the end zone, and Quentin Johnston hasn't really even been able to change direction to make a play on the ball. And I see stuff like that, and it scares me off. So, like, with your having Hall and Johnston back to back, this just goes to show, like, where flavor comes in and personal preference comes in, because for me, those guys are a little too risky, whereas Ken is swinging for the fences a little bit more. It feels like, Ken, fair to say Johnson could have a great career and be the best receiver in this draft for sure.
Yeah, he's almost the kind of player I would hate to see go to a Steelers, a team that really knows how to develop receivers, because a lot of that timidness and alligator arms that you point to, and I won't deny it at all, he's done his yards per target number, that 11, that's very hard to do without a good combination, about really being on the efficient frontier of yards per reception and catch percentage. You multiply those two things together to get yards per target. And so you want a guy who's good at both. Ideally, he's much more of a yards per reception guy. And if he can shore up some of the issues he has at the catch point, then he's going to be one hell of a football player. But I don't disagree with you. It is apparent on tape that he is not the most physical, body up player, despite his size at the catch point.
Yeah, it's up here for me with him, like his play. Sometimes like his pro day, he had a few drops, and I'm like, man, sometimes I get that deer in the headlights look from him, and it just kind of, he's dropped down further on the board. Obviously, there'd be a point where I'd take him, but my preference is for a little bit more. But Ken, let me ask you this on Quentin Johnston though. To me, like, his yak is unbelievable for a player that's about 6'3". You don't see players that size be able to move and make people miss in the open field. I suspect some of that's going to dry up in the NFL. Like, he'll be a good yak player, of course, but in college he was an outstanding yak yards after catch guy. How do you see his yak translating to the NFL, Ken?
All reduce. So I'd say all the good ones reduce. So Jamar Chase, even, is a guy who was unbelievable in college in those terms, and even he, who has been a great NFL player already, reduces. So you expect it to go down. If it was 60% of his value, I'd be really concerned about it. It's not. So I'm the yak play he has. If I had to put a percent, maybe it's 12 to 15% of his value as I see it, and he'll still retain some of that. So I would say it's not a huge factor in saying that he's going to be lower. It's really going to come down to how much do you believe he's going to be able to fix to secure more balls that are slightly outside the frame or contested by another receiver. And I hope coming to a team like the Ravens, there's going to be fewer truly contested balls because Andrews or maybe Beckham this year will be the contested catch guy, the bailout guy, and a guy like Quentin Johnson won't have to be too challenged. So it'll be a run long routes, try and get open. Hopefully he helps the team in the run game a little bit with his blocking, given his size. And I think you see value coming from some other places.
There you go. Great analysis here. Quentin Johnson burning up my DMs, my Twitter comments in the YouTube section. One of the most talked about players. Please give your opinion. What do you think? What do you think about what Ken and I had said about him? So number 12 for me, Ken, is also a receiver, but mine's a different guy, and it's Mr. Zay Flowers. And I won't ramble on and on. I have done it before. When I hear Todd Monken say making plays in space, Zay Flowers is the fit. This is a guy that is higher on my list because of how I envision him fitting into this offense as a yak guy, as a guy who can get behind you and play bigger than his frame as well. He's not big. He is fast. Everything he does with urgency, getting into his breaks, getting out of the breaks, tucking the ball away. He wants the yak. He will fight you. Toughest receiver in this draft. I don't even say pound for pound. The intensity in which he plays and the desire to get every yard. Just see it over and over again. Looks like my kind of player, Ken. So I have Zay Flowers at number 12.
Not unreasonable at all. He's number 20 on my list. And I think, the Ravens need a speed option to take the lid off the top of opposing defenses, and he'd be a very good one. Also could run a lot of gadget plays for the team. If you want to be your motion guy on these tosses in front of the quarterback in option play, then, you'd like that. I think the slot value, unfortunately, has less value to the Ravens. So if he can't be a Z and release from there, then I don't think he has a lot of value to the Ravens, or he has less value than he will to other teams. And I also think there are cheaper players that you can find for a great deep threat who will take the lid off the defense. I've got one in particular I mentioned as an honorable mention.
There you go. Yes, plenty of speed in every round, every year. So if you're just looking for, a guy that you're not expecting to make a ton of plays downfield, but just to take the lid off, open up the defense, you can find that. Me, Ken, I say he sticks at Z all day. If Hollywood Brown can stick at Z, Zay Flowers can stick at Z. That's kind of how I could see him fit. And I just love him. I love him for all all the reasons I mentioned. Now you had Joey Porter Jr. as your number 13 guy. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to introduce a new name to the list, and that's cornerback Deonte Banks. A lot of Marlon Humphrey qualities to him as far as the physicality. I don't think his hips are too tight. I think that you can move him around, match him up on bigger receivers, match him up on faster receivers, match him up even on quicker route running receivers. He gives you a rough ride throughout the route. Very technically sound as far as everything's coordinated with him. When he opens his hips, it's not the most beautiful, but everything's pretty, it gets a little mechanical, but his athletic ability, I talked about the non-negotiable speed at cornerback. He has it. I think that, he's on here ahead of some of the other players, even another tackle I like. And right behind my buddy Emmanuel Forbes is at number 14. So I'll go ahead and give that away. That's your Marlon Humphrey to me, Banks. Your Emmanuel Forbes is more of your Marcus Peters. Dealer's choice will be ecstatic with either two of these picks. But we talked about Forbes. We're on Banks now, Ken.
Banks is number 16 for me. I love him in terms of measurables, what he brings. Great prospect to come out of the Maryland system. Want to see more players come out of Maryland. That if I'm looking at the various teams, you might want the South Carolina quarterbacks. You might want the Maryland cornerbacks with Bennett. He certainly has everything that looks like it's going to work, and other teams did stay away from him, definitely in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. He had just one missed tackle all year, 4.3 yards per target. Don't love the ball production. He had only 2 interceptions in his career and a really low number. I think it was 16 passes defensed his whole career. I may have that number wrong, but he's played a lot of football for that to be the case. He's played 28 college games and had, 11 passes defensed. So in terms of ball production, that's not what I would like to see. And that's really one of the only distinguishing factors that put him a little bit lower on my cornerback board. I think he might be 6th or 7th on my board, but he's the last of the draftable cornerbacks in the top 20 that I had.
The last of the go get 'em guys. Last of the go get 'em guys. We trade back for Ken. He would be an option. For me, having him there at number 13 on my list, if the board didn't go as planned, he'd be a guy I would look at. I would look at if you didn't find a trade partner at 22. Because again, I mean, if Marlon Humphrey goes down, and this has been the case now for a couple of years, it seems like the Ravens are in bad shape. Yep. And I think that Banks is the kind of guy that can give you that. Like, he can play on the left, not going to be a ball hawk like Forbes, but he can play. He can be a starter. Won't give you the interceptions because he doesn't have the timing and the turning around and the playmaking ability for that. But as far as matching up physically and shutting and making things hard on any type of receiver, I love Deonte Banks. That's why he's my 13 guy. And Porter was your 13 guy. Mm-hmm. So we're coming down to it on the Sweet 16. My number 14, as I mentioned, is Emmanuel Forbes. Who do you have at 14, Ken?
Well, I have Jordan Addison, another wide receiver. So, he's undersized, might have lost a little bit of weight to try and run better at the combine. I've got a 449 number on him, but I don't know if that was a combine number, pro day number, whatever it might have been. But 5'11", 173. He's the Blitnikoff winner in 2022. Those awards mean something. 25 touchdowns the last 2 seasons. But what I really love about him is that he has the best wiggle at the top of the route of any of any wide receiver in the draft. He makes cornerbacks miss. He seems to have an ability to kind of wait for the cornerback to guess wrong. Now, you can't really do that in time up routes, but you can throw the wiggle in such a way that you can wait for the move for just a fraction of a second for that cornerback to guess wrong before you cross him up and take your route off. His route running, absolute top. Odell Beckham, when he was just coming out of the draft, was that kind of a route runner. Definitely runs the full route tree, which is very similar. The guy he's really similar to, and it's an overlap, but is Bateman. Bateman has the ability to run all of those different routes and give you good wiggle at the top of the route. I think Addison is, he's right in that same class of player. We'd be drafting effectively another guy who probably does best at the X spot. Give him as much space as you possibly can to run the whole tree. You can do that on the right too. He could do it from a Z if that's where you want to run him for him. But there's just, I think he gives you an awful lot. I don't think the Ravens will necessarily get that out of their current receivers for various reasons. In Beckham's case, he's a little bit unknown coming back from injury at his age and all the things. In the case of Bateman, same thing in terms of coming back from an injury. So Jordan Addison would be a great guy to have, and you can always use 3 talented receivers on your team. In fact, you can use 4 or 4.5 if you can get that many. And the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Kansas City Chiefs have figured this out. The Ravens, have accumulated a bunch of tight ends and run their offense a little differently. But the Ravens, if they're going to run a more open spread offense, they'll really appreciate having a Jordan Addison be their number 3 receiver.
I like Jordan Addison. I see him as a safe pick. I don't see the upside maybe as high as other people. He's on my list. He's my number 17 guy. So, we're splitting hairs. Ken, you have him at 14, 17, same range. I do think that the longer the play develops, he becomes impossible to cover. Mm-hmm. Like, obviously, my main problem with him is if there's called a problem, but I don't see a dynamic athlete at all. Like, he's not big, but he's not small. He's not slow, but he's not fast. 5'11", 173 is the measurements I got from the combine. Slender. Maybe he did lose weight to run faster. I don't know, but he looked slender to me. And I also look at he was productive. The conferences he played in weren't necessarily the best. He also played with Kenny Pickett and maybe a top 5, maybe the number 1 overall pick next year in Caleb Williams. So very safe player. I see passable skills at every skill set, but you mentioned, Ken, his mind and the way he's able to manipulate, to me, screams he'd be a great complementary receiver. So a player that I like. Wish he was a little bigger, wish he was a little faster, wish he was a little quicker. But you add it all up, I think he's going to be a successful pro. There we go. So, Ken, that was your number 14. My number 14 guy was Emmanuel Forbes. So we only have two more slots to go on the list. You gave us your number 16 and Deontay Banks. So there's only one more player that's going to make it on Ken McKusick's Sweet 16. Give it to me, brother.
Another cornerback, Keely Ringo from Georgia, 6'2", 207, 436, enormous aircraft carrier size. Here's the big thing, and it hasn't come up on too many players here, but he's one of the youngest players in the entire draft. He won't be 21 until late June. To have a 20-year-old at draft time that's taken has a bunch of upsides and is already the kind of physical presence that Ringo is really rare. He could have easily been higher in terms of cornerbacks, but I definitely put him ahead of Banks in terms of what he can do. I saw him punish some underthrows in college. Generally, he's been a very good man coverage guy. I'm all in on Keely Ringo at this point.
Love it. Great choice. I sometimes I wish I got to see him challenge more. So, a couple of the games I watched, it was just like he sat in off coverage and he came up and smacked the guy. Great tackler, I believe. I don't know what his missed tackle percentage was, but a very fast and physical talent, diagnosing it, sitting it off, anticipating it, coming up and tackling somebody. So I didn't get to see exactly what I wanted from him in the coverage standpoint, Ken, which pulled him down my board a little bit. Maybe that's not fair to him, but I can only go off of like what I see. I think the talk of him moving to safety is overblown. I think he's got good enough hips to stick at corner, but not the most fluid guy. That's why I have Banks ahead of him. And Ken, here's where I want to kick it to you. You have another thought on what I just said before a question?
No, just a 10% missed tackle rate for his career, which is pretty good at corner.
Thank you very much. So we're going to end up both with 5 cornerbacks in our Sweet 16 here. This goes back to a point that I've been making for months, is that when you look at the top of this cornerback class, and Ken, we even have different guys in here, that if the Ravens are stuck at 22, that a number one corner, a guy that profiles as a number one on other teams, would be a partner with Marlon, just smacks me in the face as like the obvious choice, even up above some of these receivers.
Yeah, Ravens definitely would have some options, and I think they're going to be focused on an outside corner. One of the guys that could have been in our top 16 but didn't make it is Brian Branch, who would be a great slot choice and give them some extra versatility on the inside at safety, at dime. Would take the responsibility of Marlon Humphrey from having to move to the inside. But on the other hand, having another aircraft carrier gives the flexibility to move Marlon to the slot if that's what you really find yourself needing to do, because you just have too many good outside corners, boo-hoo. Then you can do that. So I think the Ravens really need to figure out which of these guys on the outside makes sense as opposed to getting a slot guy.
There you go. So Ken, we're going to wrap it up here soon, but I'm going to reveal my 15 and 16 for anybody that hasn't seen it. And I go back to the offensive line because I consider both of these guys potential 10-year starters on the offensive line. So my number 15 guy is my positional favorite. I think I have him ahead of others, and that's Darnell Wright. Love Darnell Wright. I think he can play left tackle. I know he can play right tackle. I think he can play right tackle at a very, very high level, with Morgan Moses ending or starting the end of his Ravens career. I just can't, I don't see him too far behind. I'm going to try to say this the right way, Ken. He's not a lot behind Paris Johnson Jr. and Broderick Jones in relative terms. They're both, obviously they're in a different tier. That's why they're up there, and I have right where I have him. But I believe starting right tackle, 10, 15 years plus play through most of his career. And that's very appealing to me, to get somebody at tackle with that kind of potential. What do you think about Darnell Wright?
Okay, so a couple of comments. I do want to push back on one thing. Unless I'm talking about a quarterback, I don't want to talk about a 10-year value of a draft player, because it makes me believe that paying for those market value years that come after the initial 4 are really worthwhile. Or in this case, maybe 5, because Wright would be probably a first-round pick, or might be, and you get a 5th-year option on him. So particularly if we're talking about him at 22. So, if you want to talk about 5-year value, that's fine. I do not have the same kind of hope, optimism that he'll be able to move to left tackle. I think he's pretty much a right tackle. And I am super keen on the Ravens figuring out left tackle. They've got to figure out what is their next, who's their next guy after Ronnie Stanley. And Ronnie's been a great player, and maybe Ronnie's with us for 4 more years, but that screams out developmental left tackle. So I want to save draft capital, figure out, where I'm going to save. I'm going to take a later round left tackle prospect. If you look at Spencer Brown or some of the guys who were taken, Mason, the guy with Pittsburgh now, I think it's Mason, but that's not quite his name, is it? It's an M name.
I'm blanking. I'm just thinking
okay.
of Cora.
Yeah.
Cora.
It's not him. It's the guy they have currently at left tackle. So anyway, there've been several guys who've been late round left tackles who've been a good pick. I want normal arm length. I want all of the normals except a guy who has not yet figured it out at left tackle yet. Instead of a Marshall Yanda type left tackle, which, by the way, there's a couple available in this draft, who has really short arms, but has already hit his ceiling as far as playing that position and is almost certainly moving to guard in the NFL. So I want a guy. We have the guy at right tackle who's the backup right now, and that's Faalele. And if it doesn't work out, and it might not, then that position is a lot easier to replace than trying to find that left tackle where you may need some runway space to get him at all cheap in the draft. You may need, to be able to wait a year or two to get him to play in order for it to make sense at all in terms of draft capital reasons there. So for that reason, I couldn't include a right tackle in my top 16, and that's what I think Darnell Wright is.
There you go. So my number 16 guy, we talked a little bit about Yanda. I don't want to put anybody in Yanda's category, by the way, out of respect for one of the greatest offensive linemen of his generation. But the next guy on my list at number 16, I expect him to be gone for them. And by then, and of course, being number 16 on my board, I expect to get a player higher on my board than him. But in a trade back scenario, and maybe teams kind of see it like I do, great college tackle, probably a better NFL guard. And that's Peter Skoronski out of Northwestern. Looking at a long-term piece as far as left guard of the future, solid player. Somebody I think whose quickness, his body type, his run aggression in the run game, and obviously his natural pass protection skills all translate beautifully to the NFL, but albeit at left guard. So I have Skoronski actually at number 16, one slot ahead of Addison, because to me, he's just I think he'll be a great NFL player, a number one, undoubtedly at whatever position that he stands in. I think, Ken, a lot of teams have him at guard, and I think that there's a good chance that these guys that have him in mock drafts going 7, 8, 9, 10, that they're just saying Skoronski's the highest graded tackle. They need a tackle, like we talked about earlier. Give him Skoronski. But I have a feeling he might slip because most teams have him at guard.
Pretty good chance. And he still could be like Quentin Nelson. He's not quite the prospect that he was, that people project him to the inside and will say, yeah, he'll be fine. I wouldn't even shock me if some team thought like he should be our center. But left guard is the obvious spot. He's a good player in space. Left guard for the Ravens is on the move all the time. They climb and they pull. It's what the Ravens have done now for the last several years under a different offensive coordinator, of course. But we expect them to retain some elements of the run game because Jackson is very effective in them. And if the Ravens decide that's what they do, I think he ends up at guard. I don't think he ends up at tackle. Maybe he's a guy who gets you through a game at tackle, or maybe McCary just continues to be the guy, and then you have your new left guard, and McCary becomes your James Worthy sixth man that he can fill in wherever he's needed when the time comes. But anyway, it's not that I don't like the guy. It's not that I don't respect him. I think he's kind of a tweener in terms of size, and there are a lot of options typically for short arm players, and they'll typically last a long time. Redunds, right, was is he the one I'm thinking of from last year? They had two short arm guys in the draft last year, but he lasted quite a long time in terms of it's not him, it's somebody else, isn't it? All right, doesn't matter. But anyway, the notion is you can always wait a longer on a short arm player, and I think that the teams that have decided Those guys are going to play tackle, damn it, because they played tackle in college. Typically get an education in that first year that forces players like Eichelberg and others to move inside.
Okay, Ken. So great analysis of Skronsky. I agree with you on that. It would be a boring pick, maybe a trade back scenario. We get it. And maybe we miss out on a guy we thought was there. Because you don't ideally want to spend, especially with all these corners, you don't want to spend a first round pick on a guard. But I believe he will go in the first round. I have him as a predicted first rounder, a fine pick. I think he's going to be a very good football player, no matter where he goes. I'm worried for him that he gets caught in like a Jonah Williams situation with the Bengals, where he just wants to force his way into being a left tackle and is not equipped for it when he could just go to guard and be a dominant. And I mean, we saw what Ben Powers got paid. This guy's a much better lineman than Ben Powers.
Potentially, yeah.
A much better prospect, excuse
yes.
me.
Yes, for sure.
Ben Powers. You see what the possibilities is there to make him money at left guard. So, Ken, the only other guy I want to talk about, I had Addison in my honorable mention. I don't know if you have anybody. I'll give you the opportunity, but I have Miles Murphy right outside of this list. I like his get off. I love his timing of the snap. It's something that I go back and I think I might even do a cut up. I kind of don't want to, but Adafio Way. I was rewatching the Bengals game the other night, and that's to me is the number one thing that's holding him back. Like it's just a solid one. Where everybody else moves, one, and Adafio Way moves. And if you're a speed guy, but not to go on about Adafi. Miles Murphy, the opposite. It's in anticipating, there goes the ball. And I love his physical skills. A lot of people see him as more of a cleanup player, a pressure guy, but not a sack guy. How do you view Miles Murphy, and where would you put him on your list if you had one? First round guy, what do you think?
Well, I'm a little bit lower on Miles Murphy than you are. I have him as my number 9 or 10 edge, and I don't have my notes right in front of me, but playing through contact was one of the issues I had. Let me just see if I can bring this up for a second, and then I'll remember what the other issues I had with him. Yeah, okay. So the cleanup was one of the comments. I watched the Florida State game, and he had good plays run and pass. It wasn't like it was bad or anything, but a lot of it was cleanup. And somebody else was in there for pressure, and he was cleaning up. You went through the highlights for the year, and most of his sacks and big quarterback hits and whatnot are cleanup. That's kind of an issue. And I don't see him as a 3-4 guy who can drop the coverage. I don't think he can be moved to Sam. So I think he's a pure rush outside linebacker. Could the Ravens find value in a player like that? Of course. Will another team find more value in a player like that? Yes. So I think that's the reason why he doesn't go to the Ravens. But not really a Sam guy, and not really different from a lot of what the Ravens have in terms of pressure creators. They need a Jabo or Owe, really one of those two, or somebody they draft this year to step up as a fast pressure guy. And if they don't, their pass rush can only be so effective.
I have faith in Najabo. I'm a Najabo fan. Just his natural feel for the pass rush. And also, he wants that ball out from the quarterback, which I love about him. I expect a couple of forced fumbles from Mr. David Ajabo this year. Ken, is there anybody that just, let's talk about somebody who just missed or Ravens trade back. Is there anybody you want to just give some love to here and target and mention as a fit that didn't make our 16?
The guy I just love in terms of almost everything about him, other than he's not the ideal situation for the Ravens, is Brian Branch. And he's the top slot corner in the entire draft, and I don't think there's anywhere else that he obviously fits. He's one of the greatest tacklers in college football history. He's missed 4 of 174 attempts ever. He has 26 passes defensed in 148 college targets, so 17.6%, 14 tackles for loss playing slot corner in 2022. That's a number that you get from a pass rusher who has 14 and a half sacks or 12 and a half sacks. You don't get it from a slot corner. So he just combines everything about what you want in terms of a Ravens slot corner. The problem is we've got a slot corner. And if you move him out of slot corner, you got to move him somewhere. And that means moving him probably on the deep end to play strong safety, where he'd be great. Hamilton I'm talking about now, but that also means less playing time for Geno Stone. So when I look at that and the Ravens' chance to get a slot corner somehow, I look at who's the marginal player who gets pushed out. and it's Geno Stone getting pushed out if you get a good slot corner, and it's Stevens or JAD getting pushed out if you get an aircraft carrier on the outside. So I think aircraft carrier on the outside is what the team really needs, even though Brian Branch is one hell of a football player.
Love him. And the same reasons I have him. I mean, he's at the top of my yellow, as you can see there on the screen right now. Third player, number 23 on my list, Brian Branch. Would be a great fit, I think, with Kyle Hamilton. But as Ken said, at that point in the draft, I think I want to address a more pressing need. There are slot corners in this draft that can be had in the third round if you really wanted to go. If a trade back scenario, you pick up another. If I'm adding a DB, like Ken said, give me that outside starting cornerback, and we're going to figure out the slot among Hamilton and whoever else we pick up out there. Slot corner 22, no, is kind of where I'm going with that. But that take nothing away from Brian Branch. It's just an excellent player, and I think he'll do really well at the level. So Ken, here we are, man. We're coming up on it. Simulcasting, not only here, but of course on your YouTube channel. We're about in for the time of the year, man. It's our time to get together and have a great time.
So it's a great party. And if you haven't ever done a watch show with other Ravens fans, try it once. Try it for hours. See the passion. Look at how people are upset for what's happening to or for the Ravens with every single pick. People can't believe it. People talk out. We're going to answer as many questions as we can on air. We're going to have to try and decide technically if we can add temporary panelists to ask questions in person. So that's something we're going to try and do this year. It may work, it may not, but we'll at least do what I think Jason does very well on his channel, which is to answer the comments as they come through. And there's a lot of that. There was a lot of that last year. Some great questions back and forth out of the group in chat, and just definitely something we want to encourage. But try it once is all I'll say. It's a lot of fun.
Look, you're on the right channel for this, Ken, because this video is going to be showed on YouTube. I know some of the people are going to be watching this video. I hear from the people that are watching this video. So there's Ken saying it too to you. You don't be afraid to ask questions. Please speak up. I'm going to be looking for your names out there. I'm going to want to know what you're thinking. I want to know where you agree, what you disagree, what player is sitting there. It's like burning a hole in your pocket like your last dollar bill. That you're like, man, we should trade up to this stuff. Man, I hope this guy falls. Which player you don't want. Let's stay away from this. That's what makes it fun. There are no wrong answers, at least until like 3-4 years after the draft. Then
we'll find out what the wrong answers were.
All the wrong answers start piling up on you, Ken. Yeah. So we all miss, we all hit. Who's your favorite? But Ken, thank you for joining me. This is our last show, my last show before the draft. So I saved the best for last year, buddy. And let's hope we get some news. Maybe some Lamar news would be good. Maybe there's some trades in the works. Just some more interesting reasons to stay tuned here. Film Study and Huddle It Up Films.
All right, outstanding. Would love that. Don't know if it's in the cards, but would love that. And if you don't mind me making a quick plug here, would love for folks, particularly if you're on the show on draft night and you feel like, boy, I just can't get my say in here, contact me by DM on Twitter. And I have a very open mic kind of way of doing business during the off seasons. If you've got a show of any type you'd like to do with me, I'd love to have you on to discuss it. New statistic that you think is relevant. I just had somebody on who came up with a draft tool last night that did a great job in terms of having multiple different systems you can look at the same time to find out who the best draft partners are. So that kind of thing is always of interest to me. Doesn't have to be technical. If you want to talk franchise building, that one play, I'm sure you've heard the episodes by now, so I don't need to tell you what that's about. Or maybe do one of about 30 shows I'll do to talk about two different players, one offense, one defense. I want to hear from you. And I have a lot of the same people on time after time. Still got a good wide umbrella of outstanding week after week guests, but I want to meet even more people for producing content, on a 6 time per week method. And really appreciate everyone I meet of you. And Jason has some of the best fans out there and very interactive with his show. So love to meet some more of you.
There you go. Take Ken up on it. DM him. His Twitter link is going to be in the description. His Film Study website where he's putting out all kinds of work. But yeah, don't be afraid to go in there and work with him. If there's something Ravens that's on your mind, Ken can use it. He likes to meet people. A lot of intelligent conversations over there. So if you're not afraid to interact with me, don't be afraid to interact with Ken. He may look big and strong and scary, but he's a real. So Ken, with that cheesy dad joke, I would like to
Yes.
say thank you to my football family. I love my football family. Appreciate you, Ken McKusick. And we'll see you on draft day. Say goodnight to the people, Ken.
Night, folks.